Welcome back to Living the Sermon podcast, where we have authentic conversations about impactful subjects. Join us as we delve into topics that resonate with us, or perhaps should. With Jesus as the cornerstone and the Sermon on the Mount as our focal point, our aim is to share stories that exemplify God's love and power, alongside providing practical steps to follow the way of Jesus. Our hope is that we all may, myself included, integrate Christ's teachings into our everyday lives. Today, I have Shelby Myers on the podcast, and wow, it is a good one. I'm so excited for you to hear her story. Ultimately, the last 2 years of her life, even though we touch into some of her early years as a pastor's child, where her father was the one that baptized me as a young child. So many little things here interwoven, but we ultimately talk about becoming pregnant outside of wedlock and the shame and the guilt, and yet ultimately the grace that comes, that the father gives in those moments. Then we talk about the diagnosis or the potential diagnosis of Down syndrome and many other ailments, or a couple other ailments, I should say, with her baby that she's pregnant with. And then ultimately we talk about Down syndrome and all the things that come with it. And I don't want to give too many spoilers, so I'm going to let you listen. However, I do want to leave you with one thing. Be sure to stick around for about the middle of the episode, the 30-minute mark. I'm going to sneak in a little prayer corner as well as a book recommendation every single episode from this point forward. So stick around for the listener retention gimmick, if you will. And without further ado, the boys, if you hear them snoring, they're in the floor right now. And they're building homes around me. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode. Welcome back to Living the Sermon podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me. If you're on YouTube, then you see her. If you're not, her name is Shelby Myers. And welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. This is my first podcast I've ever done with anyone. So this is a first for me. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is cool. So Shelby and I go a long ways back. Her dad was the pastor of my church, my home church growing up. Maybe when I was in fifth grade, around that time. You were in maybe sixth.
That was exactly right. Yeah, we got there when I was in the sixth grade. So
yeah, so grown up with her family. Her brother's one of my best friends, and her dad baptized me as a young kid. And so there's so much that's interwoven here. We've done a lot of life together. I can remember vividly back. I don't know if you remember, there's a picture of us on the bus at some Christian conference or winter jam or something.
Yeah.
And I'm this little tiny baby with a Braves hat on. Something I don't remember. And we saw a famous rapper at the hotel
Webby.
at a Webby. That's right.
Webby. Yes.
IMDE. Yeah. All the things, right? So, so it's awesome, and I'm so glad to have you. And before we even get into you, I want to go ahead and preface this. This is a very raw conversation. Shelby and I have had very little conversation since her story. I guess the last maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
Last 2 years. We haven't hardly had any legit deep conversations. In passing, we've talked and I've just said, praying for you, loving you and stuff. But other than that, we haven't really dove into many conversations. And so tonight is going to be very raw and very intimate. And I don't know, we might get deep, but Shelby, so you are a journalist, an anchor. Tell us about Shelby, maybe a little bit of your upbringing, Obviously, we said your dad's a pastor, and then what you're doing today, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so grew up as a preacher's kid. When I was really young, my dad was a youth pastor. He took on a church in Salipta, Alabama, small town. That's how we got to Alabama. We were in Louisiana. And then he eventually took the job at Pine View Baptist Church where we met you guys.
Yeah,
And yeah, I've grown up a preacher's kid, had a pretty typical, normal childhood-ish. You always get the stigma preachers' kids are the worst, and I try not to live up to that hype when I
yeah,
was in high school and stuff. But anyways, I'm the oldest of four, and you're really good friends with my brother Colby,
yeah.
and really, really close with my family. Um, anyways, I now, yeah, like you said, I am a journalist. I work for Fox 10 in Mobile, and I anchor the 3 o'clock. We kind of started our own show. We do what we want. It's kind of like a podcasty, fun
That's cool.
vibe to it.
Yeah,
We do surveys and we survey the newsroom. You get a behind the scenes look. So that's been fun. And then I anchor the 4 o'clock show, which is more news oriented. And then I report occasionally. I've got to do some stories here recently that just highlight Down syndrome, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But
yeah.
yeah, so that's what I do. I work, and now I'm a mom, and I'm recently engaged, and so I mean, you know, life's kind of been crazy. And like you said, we've talked in passing, but we really haven't talked because I mean, I feel like I don't talk to anybody anymore.
Right,
This is
right,
mom
right,
life now for me.
right.
So it can be lonely,
Yeah,
but it can also be very rewarding.
yeah,
And I think true friends and real people have stood by me and
mm,
understand that I've been through a lot.
yeah.
And so, um, yeah. So here we are. I'm glad we're
So
getting to
here
have
we
this
are.
conversation. I have, yeah, lots to talk about. Hopefully I don't talk too much because I'm
No,
known for that. It's my job. That's what I like to do.
right. Well, I already told you if we get to a point to where we need to cut it off, we're going to cut it off, and we'll
Yeah.
come back to part two. So
Mhm.
don't feel bad. I don't want to stop the Lord if
Mhm.
he's going to try to say something to someone specific that's
Mhm.
listening at this moment. So, um, well, obviously you grew up as a pastor's child. I want to touch on that before we even get to the other stuff. I want to touch on just the pressure
Mhm.
potentially of being a pastor's kid, as it regards to faith, but also especially being the oldest, as it
Mhm.
regards to just the pressure. Obviously, my dad being the mayor, which they learned in the last episode that my dad was mayor of my hometown.
Yeah.
I had a similar pressure, but probably not equivalent to that. So
Mm.
give us a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think all eyes are on you. In your case, being the mayor's son, in my case, being a preacher's daughter, and people really judge you harder, and they're
Mm,
real quick to go to your parents, and they see you doing something. Or I remember one time my dad got a letter from somebody that said the way Shelby walks around at football games, like she's just better than everybody. And I'm like, what? I'm just walking at a football game. So it felt like
oh,
everybody was just really, on me. And
and that's also the nature of Thomasville. And
yeah,
well, I wouldn't say
small town.
Thomasville. I don't want to. I don't want to. Last, I've already got in trouble for kind of picking on Thomasville a little bit in the last episode. So
Uh-oh.
I wouldn't say Thomasville, but just small town in
Small
general.
towns.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So yeah, I remember the eyes being on me. My dad being a pastor and it being a small town, he was friends with the mayor, with all the law enforcement, the sheriffs, your grandfather,
right.
before he passed, God rest his soul. And so he was like, I have police officers that are watching you, everything you do. He would tell me this, and I'm like, okay. So I feel like I stayed fairly a decent kid. I mean,
Oh,
I
for
had
sure.
some, rebellion and some
Yeah,
things
for
you
sure.
do and some secrets. I think we all kind of do that.
Yeah,
But yeah, during that time, I enjoyed going to church. I wasn't one of those preacher's kids that didn't like it. I
mm,
always had a great time.
yeah.
I loved youth group and getting to hang out with you guys.
Hmm.
So I didn't hate being a preacher's kid. I think that, towards the end of my dad's time at Pineview, I was a senior in high school. I was about to go to college, and my dad decided to step down from the church. And I think that
Was he nudged, or it was his own decision?
it was his own decision. From everything he told us, we were actually out west on a trip to Yellowstone with my grandparents, and dad stayed back and had this whole
Mm.
spiritual warfare
Oh
and
wow.
church. and deacons didn't like him and all this going on. There were people that said he was trying to start a cult because he wanted to cut out Sunday night church, cut out Wednesdays, and go to small groups, which, as you know, that's really what churches do nowadays. And they thought he was starting a cult. And there were
Oh my
even
goodness.
people who passed out flyers saying, "How do you know your pastor's starting a cult?" or something to that effect. So
No
I think,
way.
yes.
I didn't hear all these details. I did hear some of this, but I didn't hear all these details.
People started rumors that my dad was having an affair, all these things. So it got nasty. And I think that
Small
that
town.
really, yeah, small town. I think that really turned me off. It was hard. I never lost my faith in God. I never lost my faith in Jesus. But I think that it kind of just pushed me away. Like, I just don't really want to deal. I don't want to go to church. I don't want to deal with this right now. So as I went into college, I kind of was at that point. And, I did let loose in college. I did party a good bit. I mean, I think that's where the rebellion comes in. You're a preacher's
Right.
kid. Everybody's watching you. You go to college and you're like, oh, I'm free.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of all added up to kind of me just doing my own thing for a while. And then eventually I found City Hope, and kind of during the end of my college, and then after, returning back to Mobile after my first job,
Mhm.
of course I got back into church and all that. But yeah, being a preacher's kid, it overall wasn't bad.
Yeah.
But the church can, not the church, but people,
Mm.
because we're all
Oh, yeah.
sinful,
Yeah.
can really say and do hurtful things.
Mm.
And I think that it did hurt me probably a
Yeah.
lot deeper. I wanted to lash out and go up and
For
confront
sure.
these people.
For
And
sure.
my dad was like, I'm not doing that. You don't need to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Right. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. And I think that's so important for us as people. And I mean, this is like every single person really is like, we
Mm-hmm.
have to be so good at
Mm,
looking at the people of the body and saying that's not a true representation of
mm,
Christ.
mm-hmm,
Like the church as we know it in terms of the physical building and the people that are in there
mm-hmm.
is not always going to represent Christ in the way that they should. And
Yep.
because of the sinful nature that the sin that is within us that we're still trying to work out,
Mm,
hopefully, unless
yeah.
we're being hypocrites or whatever the case may be. But so that's cool. So that's awesome. So that's exactly where I wanted. So obviously now, so we've already talked about the fact that you have a baby boy, and we've talked about that. Now let's kick that off. So let's go ahead
Yeah.
and dive into.
Mm-hmm.
So you were dating a guy, and boom, accidents happen, and
Yeah.
we got pregnant.
Yeah. So about a year into our relationship, I kind of knew right away. Nowadays, there's just signs and apps you can track things on. And
Right.
I kind of knew right away. And weirdly, I was at church on a Sunday, and it was like I mean, this would have been like the very beginning of being pregnant. But
Mhm.
my sister texted me, my baby sister, and she said, I'm sitting in church, and she texts me and goes, I had a dream that you're pregnant. And I was like, ha 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 ha.
What?
Yeah. So, sure
Y'all
enough,
so spirit filled. Gosh,
it was
I'm
wild.
jealous.
It was wild. Yeah.
Y'all
No.
so spirit filled.
Oh, but
Lord.
yeah. So, anyways, I think I knew pretty early on. You know, growing up, again, being a preacher's daughter, I went out to eat with my dad at 13 years old. I got the purity ring. I knew this is what I wanted to do, and this is how I wanted to wait until I was married. Um, and that was always my goal. And I think that you fall in love, and there's sin and there's temptation and all these things, and I think that things happen. You love somebody. So anyways, I got yeah, got pregnant a year into a relationship. I knew that Zach, my fiance is Zach too, so don't get confused, all those that listening.
Yeah, right, right, right.
Um, but my Zach, yeah, I knew that I wanted to marry him, and like that
Mm,
this was serious and that we loved each other,
yeah,
and we had gotten to that point. It wasn't like, early in the relationship, regardless. Um, I remember I didn't tell my parents till the end of the first trimester. I didn't tell anybody.
mm,
And I remember writing in a journal. I had started writing in a journal, and I remember writing some things now I've read back, and it was very, very dark. It was very hard to even talk about or read back.
Mm.
And I felt so much just guilt and shame and just worried being on TV, being a face,
Yeah.
that in the South, people would, first of all, judge me there. Then people outside that look up to me for all reasons. I have cousins. I mean, I'm the oldest cousin of all my cousins. I have younger siblings. I'm the oldest sibling that, everybody would just kind of be disappointed in me.
Mm.
And I knew though deep down that my dad, even being a preacher, that my dad was going to be okay with it,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's the kind of dad we took in 16 and pregnant year olds that their parents had kicked him out. We did that
Right.
multiple times growing
Mm.
up, and my dad had counseled people and talked to people that had 16-year-olds that had got pregnant and
Right.
said, "You're going to love them. Like, what are you going to
Right.
do? You're going to love this
Come
baby."
on.
So
That's good.
I knew that my dad would be okay. I mean, I'm 31 years old when this happened, so I'm not 16 and pregnant, but
Right.
still.
Right.
But I did feel all this shame. I did go all this, and I remember though just praying and getting right with God and talking to God, and all those feelings of shame and embarrassment. It was like they weren't there. It was
Mm.
like God did not see me that way. God gave me
Mm.
this spiritual hug and just was there. It That's not what he's about. And I
Yeah.
felt that overwhelming sense of like, I love you, Shelby. Like,
Mm.
I'm not looking at you a certain way. Like,
Right. Mm.
and that's, if you're listening to this, that's not to say like there aren't consequences to sin. There
Right.
aren't consequences to sex before marriage. There
Right.
aren't lots of things that go along with that.
Right. But
But that's just,
there's no need to tell you that. Your dad hasn't come and
yeah.
doesn't need to come and say, "Hey, look, this," because you're a follower of the way. You
Hmm.
know the scriptures. You know that, like, hey, this is not
Right.
what needs to happen. This is not the order of operations
Right.
that we should go through. However, at the same time, you know, when this moment happens, it's not, I don't have to come, Shelby, no,
Yes.
because you're not, I mean, you're not 16,
Yeah.
you're not 12.
Hmm.
So it's not like, so I can't just blanket you with shame. I have to say, hey, Shelby, it's going to be okay.
Hmm.
Like, this is a question mark. We live by this standard, this ethic
Hmm.
of like, hey, grace can cover this. Like,
Hmm.
the Lord is going to bless this.
Hmm.
And like my dad told my sister, which for those of you who don't know, my sister
Hmm.
had a child at 19, 18 or 19, right when she graduated high school. And so out of wedlock. And it was like, whoa, what just happened?
Hmm.
But at the
Hmm.
same time, my parents just loved her. She didn't
Yeah.
need to be told that.
Right.
And when you have parents that are like that, or friends or anyone
Mm,
else like that's going to lean in and love you, that's exactly what we need
mm,
in those moments.
absolutely. And so being on TV, I had maybe two people that ever said anything. And one person was
Mm.
like, "You're a Christian, you should know better." And I don't know this person. And I told them, and, being hormonal and I think I'd already had Baker at this point, but being hormonal, I kind of went off on them in a sense. I just said, like, "You don't know me. You should not come to somebody about their sin if you don't know them personally." That's how I feel. So I did have that. But other than that, everybody was, just so kind.
Mm.
I went home and I remember, telling my family, I was so nervous. I mean, I cried all the time. Um, and I just remember going up there to tell my family, and my dad was washing dishes, and he rarely cleaned. Like, mom usually washes the dishes. I mean, he does help and stuff, but like, I'm like, "What are you, Dad, sit down. I have to tell you something."
Yeah.
So they go and sit down, and I'm like, "You remember when you're always talking about, you want grandbabies, you want grandbabies?" I said, "Well, one might be coming a little sooner than you expected." And I'm crying like that. And he goes, "What?" And he hugs me. He's crying. I said, "I'm so
Mm.
sorry. I'm so sorry." I just remember saying that. And he was like, "What are you sorry about? What are you sorry about? There's nothing to be sorry about." And I think that, your dad, your father, should be a representation of the
Mm.
spiritual father. And in that
Right.
moment, like, he was. And I'm like,
Right.
if my parents can forgive me and be okay and not chastise me or look down on me, how
Mm.
much more does the heavenly father not
Mm.
do that?
That's good.
um so yeah, I think that my mom, I thought my mom would be a little more judgmental because she is more of the straight lace mom,
Right.
like follows the rules.
Right.
And she wasn't. She wasn't like that either. So that was just like you said. I didn't need somebody to be like, "This is a sin. This is wrong," because I know that. I know
Right.
that.
Right.
I'm already beating myself up about it.
Right. Right.
I don't need anybody else to. So
Right.
my whole family, everybody was just so supportive, and
Mm.
for that I was thankful, and they continue to be supportive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So did you have like friends that were obviously mothers because, we're,
mhm,
30 years old. And so you probably had friends that were like so excited
mhm,
for this process and were able to pour into you and tell you all the little things that were happening. Obviously I'm a male, so I'm going to miss a lot of the major things, but like, and we won't even necessarily talk about, but like, open that up a little bit of just like some of the friends that were close and just there to
mhm,
just support and like how important community is
mhm.
at a time like this.
Yeah, that is so important because I'm not a person that likes to keep things to myself. And this, I kept that a secret for 3 months, the first
Mm.
trimester of my pregnancy. So
Yeah.
the most hormonal time, the most emotional you are, the sickest you are, when you're feeling terrible, I had to keep the secret to myself. So that added to everything. So
Mm.
as soon as I was able to tell my friends and have their support, I think that it just released so much off of my shoulders.
Yeah.
And so, and then second trimester, that's when everything really changed. But yeah, having that community has been a game changer from the
Yeah.
beginning and still to this day. People that will stick by you to know that you're not going to be able to go out and hang out with them just at the drop of a hat now because you're pregnant and then you have a kid, and people that still understand that and still can be friends with you. That is the best possible case scenario.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing is, for me personally, with the whole scenario, people are going to be like, well, this and this, and, scripture's clear about this and so on and so forth. And then you come to a scripture like John 8, where he talks about this adulterous woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not by all means saying that specifically like you, but I'm saying just the simple fact of like, who is without sin among you?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus tells the people in the crowd, like, she's been caught in the act of doing it. And Jesus is like, who among you has not sinned? If you're here, then you can throw the first stone. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like that alone should be the picture of how we approach these situations as a follower of the way. And obviously that's not in the sermon, and the podcast is living the sermon, but that ethic in the sermon is translated or transmutated, I guess, in a way into these words that Jesus is using here to talk to these people. And ultimately, like that's the logic and the ethic that we should have as friends of Shelby or friends of someone that you might know that is
Mm-hmm.
going through this same scenario. You have to approach it in that way because the shame and guilt's already there. We just need to
Mm-hmm.
extrapolate and say, hey, look, I know what's going on, but I just want to let you know that I love you and I'm going to be here with you every step of the way as long as you want me to be here, and so on and so forth. And I think that is just absolutely important in our walk, is to just remove those things to be able to love. And love comes with, like you said, the sin does come with consequences, and that's
Right.
something you'll deal with, but that's not something that I need to bring up
Mm-hmm.
ultimately.
Yeah.
So
Dad had
that's
actually sent me that sermon, I think, after the fact, and I can't remember exactly, but it was a different take on that woman and all that. And he had sent me like, it was a devotional basically. Somebody
oh
had
yeah,
written things about
yeah,
it, and I remember him sending me that. So that story definitely sticks out. But that's so true. Like, who hasn't sinned? And this sin is, everybody can see this sin.
yeah,
How
yeah.
many secret sins
Mhm.
are there, and
Sin.
that people go through,
Yeah,
and they don't, it's not come to light yet. It will,
yeah,
but this is more of those ones that you can't really hide. And so
yeah,
it's like a double whammy, but
yeah,
it's still a sin, and God views them all the same, and we all fall short, and we all sin.
right, right.
So
Yeah, but there's still grace, and He still
that's
loves
right. That's
you.
right.
So let's transition. So obviously we're pregnant. You're going to the doctor. You're getting all these tests. You're running everything, making sure everything's moving right. For those of you who know Taylor. Whoa, Shelby, you know, where I'm going with this. So
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, Shelby gets a diagnosis
Mm-hmm.
of some things. So let's hear that. Start from going to the doctor and
Mm-hmm.
finding out the diagnosis and unpacking that for us.
So you go at 20 weeks, you go to have an anatomy scan where they do an ultrasound, but on this ultrasound, it takes a lot longer than all the others. They look at every detail of the body to see if there's any deformity, see if anything's not growing the way it's supposed to. And so they came upon something with the heart. And they're like, hey, like we see a hole in the heart, something's not exactly right. So we're going to send you to a pediatric cardiologist to
Mm.
take a look. And so immediately, I really was like, I started Googling it, of course, and holes in hearts are fairly common. A lot of times they close up before a baby's even born, or even after they're born, you just kind of watch it and they close up. So
Right.
I'm thinking that. I'm thinking that.
Right.
So we go to the pediatric cardiologist, and I'm still thinking that, and she comes out with this sheet of paper with what a heart looks like, and she's showing me all this stuff, and it hits me like, this is a big deal. She was like, so basically, your baby's going to have open heart surgery at around 6 months or so. And I'm like,
Oh, wow.
what? So I just remember, crying. I remember calling my parents and telling them and crying, and Zach calling and telling his parents. And my parents immediately came down. My
Mhm.
mom and my dad, they came down to Mobile with my sister. She was in town, and, we just went out to eat and we just talked, and they were there for me immediately. They prayed over me and my baby, our baby, and so that was, it was hard. I think I was like, I'm not going to Google anything now from this point on. Now that I know the diagnosis, it's called
Right.
AV canal or AVSD. It's a heart
Yeah. Stay
defect
away from
where,
web. Stay away from
right.
WebMD.
So I was like, I'm not going to look at anything for a week. I think I didn't look online. Well, then I had time to deal with it and come to that. Like, my baby's going to have open heart surgery. It is what it is.
Mhm.
Um, so I come to terms with that about a week later. I start Googling, and everything that I was reading was like, this is very common. This heart defect is very common in Down syndrome, Down syndrome, Down syndrome, Down syndrome. And I'm like, no way. No way. I'm not going to have a baby with Down syndrome. That's just crazy. And then it was like, I just remember being in bed one night and I just couldn't sleep, or I woke up from my sleep and I just started sobbing. And I was like, I knew in my heart of hearts that my
Mhm.
baby had Down syndrome. It
Mhm.
just like hit me like just everything. And I just knew. I was like, my baby has Down syndrome.
Yeah.
So we decided, Zach and I decided to go through with the blood test, because to me, the blood test was like, I don't agree with abortion. I'm not going to have an abortion, so I don't care. So I
Right.
didn't do the blood test initially. Like some
Yeah.
women, they do that
Yeah.
like
I
right
was gonna
away.
ask you. In my mind, I was like, I thought about asking you earlier, like whether or not abortion crossed your mind, but I was like, yeah, I
No,
guarantee it didn't.
it,
So
it, no,
yeah.
I mean, you think, and that can go back to the dark thought situation. You think, like, I don't want this,
Yeah.
but I knew that no, that never crossed my mind
Never a
to,
choice. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, it's like, this is it. I don't want to be pregnant. That did
Right.
cross my mind, but not the fact that I want to do anything about it, if that
Right.
makes sense. But anyway, so we didn't do that initial blood test because I was like, whatever, like I don't care. So I didn't think about it. And then after the heart defect diagnosis, I said, okay, let's do a blood test to know kind of for sure. And sure enough, I think it was 77% chance that our baby would have Down syndrome.
Mm.
And so that was kind of like, I think for a little while, Zach was like, well, there's still a chance. They don't know. These tests aren't always right. And that can't be the case.
Right.
But when we talked to my gynecologist, it was like, she said, with this heart defect plus such a high percentage on that blood test, I would say there's
Like
a
100%.
99.9% chance that your baby has Down syndrome. So, we kept that. Other than our family and some close friends, we really didn't, because that's hard. Like, how do you say, or how do you announce, like, hey,
Yeah.
everybody, just like, how do you
Yeah.
say that? Like, hey,
Yeah.
everybody, just letting you know I'm pregnant. And also, we
Yeah.
found out way later my son has Down syndrome.
Yeah.
So we kind of kept that close, family and friends, some close friends. And, we went from there. And yeah, And the week before I gave birth, we found out he also had a stomach issue.
Mm.
So it
So
was a
before we get there, so let's talk through the diagnosis, like
mhm,
mental framework, faith, like how was the response? Like obviously we talked about the pregnancy and a dark season. Was there were you already kind of at the point of like your faith was like, hey, God's in control of this because
mm,
of of the dark season that you went through and then coming on
mhm.
the other side? Was it just like kind of like a gradual climb, maybe a little dip, or were there serious things that were thought or perceived or worries, things that happened that you had to cling to the Lord on in that season?
Yeah, I think the worst was really before I had the support when I kept the secret to myself because I was so shamed
Mm,
by myself.
yeah,
And I think once I had my family support and my close friends and all that, I think that it was okay. I think Zach, and the good man that he is, he said it doesn't matter. Like he never was like, I don't want this. And that happens a lot.
yeah,
I think it's harder for a man in general, not to put them all in that box, obviously, because Zach's not like that. But, there's many men who have been like, I don't want this child. There's men
right,
who push for abortion because it had Down syndrome. And
yeah,
then Zach was never like that.
yeah,
He was like, it's okay. Like, we're going to
yeah,
love this kid. So
right,
just having that support and then knowing that, yeah, God, I think what helped me in my faith was knowing first of all, getting pregnant is a miracle in itself.
absolutely,
Having a baby with Down syndrome is almost a miracle in itself because it's more
right.
rare. It doesn't happen a lot. So I'm like, God meant for this to happen.
Come on,
God
yeah,
meant for this to happen. And even more, it's clear
yeah,
that there's a reason and that I'm chosen to be this child's mother and that Zach's chosen to be his dad and that we're going to bring this kid into this world. So I don't, it's hard because now it's been a year and a half plus 2 years ago.
yeah,
But I think just knowing that and my faith had gotten stronger and just having a support system around me that,
yeah. That you weren't going
I
to be alone, and that all
yeah,
the question marks of how do we tend to a baby with Down
hmm
syndrome? How am I going to have the hands? Me
hmm
and my spouse both work full-time jobs. Like, how is this
hmm
going to work? And um, those are the questions that might pop up. But because you had such a good network around you,
yes,
it obviously helped
mm,
those calm those thoughts that may have bubbled up.
yeah. So many people praying for us for sure.
Yeah, that's
So
good. That's so good. You've made it to the halfway point. Welcome to the listener retention gimmick. In this spot of every episode about the midway point, I'm going to drop a prayer corner as well as a book recommendation. And so today I want to talk about a friend of mine whose sister has just received some bad news about her cancer returning. Her name is Brittany, and ultimately, I just want to extend her to you guys so that you guys could pray for help, pray for confidence and trust in the doctors, but also pray for the doctors themselves, and most importantly, like that her body would be healed, but also receive the treatment. And that there's no other complications or anything that is involved with the process. And then lastly, I want to pray for her family as she will have to go to Houston for extended periods of time uh, consistently. And so we just want to lift them up. And then secondly, I want to pray for the war in Gaza. I want to pray for Israel and Palestine both, as we know that we have an obligation to pray for the future of Israel, the hope of Israel, right? We also must separate the state of Israel as well as the Israel that we see in Scripture. In many ways, they're very different. The empire of Israel, it's just like the empire of America, which we'll talk about later, is those are two different things. And so while they are murdering innocent people, that's never okay. And so I just want to pray for the people that are being affected, the people that are losing their homes, the people that are losing jobs and are starving. and hopes that maybe we can, that the Lord would just issue a peace deal, and the U.S. is not doing a good job of being involved in this whole thing. Anyways, don't want to talk about this too much, but let's talk about a book. Discipleship on the Edge is the book of choice today by Daryl Johnson. It is an expository journey through the book of Revelation. Insanely good book. The Revelation can be very intimidating at points when you're reading it if you're not immersed in ancient Israel, context, if you will, especially if you're not immersed yourselves in the prophets, like Daniel, and just the imagery that was used. And so this is a very great guide to tie some of those links together so that you're not slinging some absolute ridiculous prophecy on the internet. Anyways, thank you guys for listening to this episode. And isn't it so good thus far? So good. Let's jump back into it and let's listen to what Shelby has to say. So obviously we get the diagnosis, and so I guess you were at the stomach portion. So you find out just before you're about to give birth that the stomach happens. So back to it.
Basically, like, God bless them. Don't know why or what causes it, but that extra chromosome, there's so much health complications that go along with it. And a lot of times, like, they have heart defects, and 50% of kids with Down syndrome have a heart defect. So it's a lot of them. And then they all have a lot of stomach issues. And so Baker's pancreas, we found out, was wrapped around his stomach. So it was like pushing like this. So if he did eat anything and had to go to the bathroom, it would be hard for it to, because it's the pancreas is squeezing on his stomach to go out of the stomach and use the bathroom.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I remember we were praying for her poop at one point.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think I got that diagnosis the week before we gave birth. I gave birth, and I just remember, like, what else, God? I remember in the parking lot, I barely made it out of the park. I cried in the doctor's office, but then, like, trying to keep it together, passing people, and I just, in the doctor's office parking lot, just sobbed. I'm like, God, like, really? Like, 3 things? We got a heart defect, then he has Down syndrome, and now we have a stomach issue that he's gonna have surgery on. So I think that was hard. But, I just said, had that cry, moved on. I said, we got to do this. So they made the decision to send me to Birmingham because they hire the best of the best, Children's of Alabama in Birmingham. That hospital is just, they're incredible. So got sent up there, and I delivered up there, and the delivery on my end was smooth. I didn't get to hold my baby, Baker, when he was born. And I think that was very traumatizing because you're supposed to have chest to chest.
The connection, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was really traumatizing. It's, a lot of times I think about it or I talk about it and I cry because I missed out on that because he had to be given oxygen immediately because of his heart defect. They just wanted to make sure he could breathe and all that. So, yeah. But he came to this world September 2nd of 2022, Jonathan Baker Brownell.
Okay.
And he was about a month early, but he was
goes by Baker, right?
Goes by Baker, yep. Okay. 6 pounds, 13 ounces. And I heard from a lot of people I reached out to in the Down syndrome community before. There's Facebook groups. There's so many support groups that I got connected to and asked questions and talked to. And they were like, when you see your baby, you forget about that diagnosis.
Wow, that's awesome.
And that was what happened. I remember the first thing I asked my mom was like, can you tell he has Down syndrome? And Mom was like, yeah, his eyes, I think you can tell. Yeah. And I was like, okay. But other than that, because we didn't know 100% that he would. So I just was like making sure.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was like, that's my baby. That's all you think about. You don't see a diagnosis anymore. That goes out the door. It's like, that's my baby. Right. Part of me. It's part of Zach. And I just loved him immediately, and I didn't
Yeah.
think of that Down syndrome diagnosis anymore. So,
Right. And he was a miracle, as you said. Like
hmm
having a child is a miracle in and of itself. And then obviously the fact that he had all these complications and he's still thriving and
hmm
doing well. So talk about, you know, for the people who don't have, you know, a real good grasp, obviously we know what Down syndrome
hmm
kind of is and looks like, but your research, like you digging in and trying to figure out, like how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to, support him and do all the things that we need to make sure that you can be the parent that you need to be. It's for Zach as well. Like how was that journey?
It's been hard, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm perfect because there are times that I was thinking about this when I knew I was going to talk to you, that I want to sit in that victim mentality. Why
Mhm.
me? Why do I have
Mhm.
to do this? And here's the thing, I would never ever wish away his Down syndrome diagnosis. Don't get this
Mhm.
confused. So many people think, I wish he didn't have Down. No, that's
Yeah.
part of him now. And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. Down syndrome people can be the happiest people, bring the most joy, they smile the most. There's so many positive things.
Yeah.
But there's a health side to that diagnosis that I wish
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that I can sit sometimes and feel sorry for myself and sit in that victim mentality of, why do I have to do this? Like, I'm not only am I a mom, a first time mom, but I'm a first time mom of a child that has different abilities.
Mm.
Like, why me? Why do I have to do this? Like, there's so many other people. And like, you just go into that mentality. And so I have to talk myself out of that a lot. And just go back to the part that I'm grateful that I get to
Mm.
be his mom, and
Right.
that I'm equipped, that God's given me everything. He's given me a support system, like I've talked about, that I can do this.
Yeah.
Um, so I think a lot of research goes into, taking care of a kid with Down syndrome, and
Mhm.
a lot of finding support, a lot of using the internet, because you have to do it yourself. As sad as it is, local doctors do not know enough. Here in
Really?
Mobile, they do not know enough about Down
Wow.
syndrome. They're not studying, they're not keeping up to date with it. I don't know if it's because there's so few people with Down syndrome compared to the masses that they see.
Yeah.
So I think that I've taken a lot on, and that can also be, I blame myself if anything goes wrong. Well, I should have known better. I should have. And I think that that has hit me a lot too when I was in the hospital. When we've been in the hospital, a nurse told me, she said, this isn't on you to figure
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Like, let us figure this out. Let us
Yeah.
help you. So it's a constant struggle though, because there are doctors down here that just are ignorant. And you
Mm.
think, well, you went to school, but there's so much that goes into it. Yeah, it's a difficult diagnosis from the health angle because they are so
Mm.
different.
Right.
So yeah, it's a
You almost
lot.
feel like you're kind of on the shoulder and not really getting a full,
Mhm.
one on one. I wouldn't say one on one, more like a very intentional doctor, or maybe it's just potentially, in some ways overlooking or just not
Mhm.
being like attentive to the things that you're maybe
Yeah.
communicating to him and so on and so forth.
I've had an
That's
ear, nose,
true.
and throat doctor that told me, they were like, I don't really know. Basically, it was like, I think you'd be better with a different doctor. I don't really know how to. I'm like, so you don't know about Down syndrome? Okay, that's happened to me, and it's been very eye opening. Um, yeah, for sure.
Sounds like the medical community needs to step it up.
I could go on
So,
a spiel about that, but
yeah. Well, and I do want to allude to that. Like, I do want to talk about that because for those of you who do follow Shelby on socials, and we'll get your socials here in a bit because I want people to follow and experience your journey. But also, like, you post very good content in the sense of, like, I guess you could say, I'm not going to say you're very holistic and just this herbalist, naturalist type of thing, but you are aware of the things that are coming into your household, not necessarily
hmm
your body, but your household in general. And so, like, that is, I guarantee you, I'm guessing it's another layer of things with Baker. Obviously, like, hey, we want to make sure that we feed him and get him, healthy as much as possible. Because, as you said, a stomach issue, a heart issue, there's so many things that you can do with just the things that are in your household and the things that are in your pantry to help him as much as possible.
Mm. That was seeing him in a hospital bed. So we were in the NICU for 6 weeks after he was born because he had immediate stomach surgery. And then they wanted to make sure he could eat by mouth. They wanted to make sure he could poop. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
we pray for poop.
Yeah.
So being in the hospital, I couldn't do the typical things that a mother does with her baby by, holding their baby the way they want to because he had wires all on him. He had oxygen. He had all these things. So I remember like I can fight for him by pumping, by breastfeeding him.
Yeah.
And so that was I was like I'm going to do this. And so he had solely breast milk until he was about probably close to a year old. So I was like, I'm going to do that for him. And then now there's different, more holistic things that I'm looking into now about supplements that are all natural. They're like vitamin type things, but smart people, they're not even doctors, but they've had kids with Down syndrome and they've been fed up with the healthcare
Yeah.
system. So they have created and researched and studied and created this whole, it's called TNI, targeted nutritional something. And I'm sorry, I can't remember it. But, anyways, they've learned about the things that Down syndrome lacks, that their body, just their
Yeah.
makeup lacks,
Like
and they
micronutrients.
supplement that
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good.
curcumin and like things you hear of and things I've never heard of, um, that help. And so I've just started learning about that, and now I'm going to start giving Baker some things in that program. But yeah, it's been on us to kind of figure that out and me to figure that out because your typical doctors aren't going to do that, but
Yeah.
there's so many people that say that this has worked for them, and so I want that
That's
for
good.
Baker. Mm-hmm.
That's good. So obviously, when you have a typical baby, they're gonna cry, their coos, and all the things are gonna signal and give all these general responses that you need to take to help. And so I think obviously this scenario is important in terms of like how you need to better equip, well, your pantry in a way, I guess you could say, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to provide and make all these markers that he might be missing out on, because that's so interesting to me, like of how and I wish the medical
Mm-hmm.
world had a blood panel or something that they could do
Mm-hmm.
in order to give you these answers, which might be out there, but it seems like that something is missing in that link of like, hey, look, we've known that this is an issue within the Down syndrome community that we need to address,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like something needs to happen. And we could talk about that all night. I will talk about that all
Yeah,
night.
yeah, there's so much, but even like dairy and gluten, you're not going to hear from your typical doctor, don't give your Down syndrome baby dairy and gluten. And not all, again, Down syndrome is a diagnosis, but each person is different. Don't get me
Right,
wrong, they're not looped into the same. That's what I've learned a lot too through this journey is Baker is Baker first and foremost.
right,
He's Baker, he's my son, he's God's son, and then he has Down syndrome.
right,
So I don't want to loop everybody into that category, but
right.
a lot of people in general have issues with gluten and dairy. A lot of people in the Down syndrome community, especially, have issues with dairy and gluten. And so just things like that, you're not going to hear that from a typical doctor. You've
Yeah.
got to go to kind of
Or
more of a holistic nutritional approach to that. But those are two things that Baker's not going to eat. We're going to
yeah,
go around that.
yeah.
So like things like that.
Yeah, our nutritional system's absolutely
Mm,
botched at this point. So,
yeah.
and it's absolutely ridiculous. Um, so obviously, we've talked about the challenges that you might have. Let's pivot. Like, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
talk about the difficult stuff anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the joys. Like, I want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about the fun things, the beauty of having a baby with Down syndrome, and just how that just brings joy to your heart and Zach's heart. Let's talk about that.
So again, all people with Down syndrome are different,
Mhm.
but there is this joy that is about them, especially when they're babies, and it's not even like everybody says this. People said this to me all the time. They're like, I have a cousin, I have a sister with Down syndrome, yada, yada. They're the most joyful people ever. And we've already seen that with Baker. He has a smile we call his $1,000,000 smile that just, it brings joy to anybody, like family, but outside of family, friends, people that see him on social media. I hear people like, once removed from me. So like a friend of mine that'll show a picture to their friend that I don't even know,
Yeah.
that will come back and tell me when I finally meet them, oh my gosh, I've seen pictures of him. He is so cute. I just want to squeeze him. I just want to hold him.
Yeah.
And I know babies in general, but like it's just even more with Baker.
Yeah.
So people in the Down syndrome community are developmentally delayed, not only intellectually, but every single muscle in their body, things you
Mm.
don't think about, their stomach muscles inside.
Mm.
That's what makes them digest slower. They have issues because everything works with a muscle. So their swallow, all of this is slower. It's harder for him to eat foods. He's delayed in so many ways. He
Yeah.
doesn't follow the milestones that a typical baby does.
Right.
And while that's a bad thing, it's also been a sweet thing because you get to keep your baby longer. He's not crawling
That's
and
a good
walking as
perspective.
soon,
Yeah.
but he's my baby that wants to cuddle still and do
Yeah.
things. So there's that aspect, and there's just seeing him overcome so much, as bad
Mm.
as that is, just the other side of that.
Yeah.
Like,
He's tough.
he's tough. He's been through things that I haven't even been through half of what he's been through, and he's a
Like
year and a
that.
half old.
Yeah.
And so, like, just seeing how strong he is and how hard he fights,
Mm.
it's inspiring. And it's just like, again, like God had him here for a reason.
For
So
sure.
there's so many things beyond a diagnosis. And I don't want people to get stuck on that because it's once you see your baby, once you have that child, you may be thinking, I didn't want this because I did. I said, I don't want my child to have Down syndrome. I don't want this. This
Right.
is not how I envisioned my child.
Mm.
But once they're here and you meet them, you see them, things out the window. Yeah, there
Right.
are worries and there are fears and there are things, but you take it one day at a time and you see
Right.
the good, and it far
Mm.
outweighs
Yeah.
um, the things unknown.
Yeah.
You just live in that moment. So he's
That's
been a
good. I mean,
joy.
that's a picture of God's sovereignty in and of itself, of just like, you didn't picture this for yourself, but I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it says it in Proverbs, like, we, make our steps, but, God is the one that ultimately anoints those steps and,
Mm.
and guides us. And ultimately it's like, if we trust the God that we have, if we trust Jesus and we trust him, like if we trust, then we should trust that, hey, look, you're in control. No matter what
Yes.
happens. Like God forbid, something else happens and something else happens and something else happens. But like God is in control. And he's faithful. He's always faithful.
Mm.
He's always going to work things out for our good. And that's just something that we have to trust. And
Yes.
sometimes, people who aren't Christians tend to don't understand that, but it's something that, it's so evident and so true. And the big picture of all of this is that we live, like, the amount of time that we're on earth is like this compared to,
Right.
the rest of eternity. And we know that Baker is going to be fully healed and with Down syndrome in heaven, but fully healed without those ailments that you were talking about.
Right.
I'm not going to, like you said, I'm not going to wish that away because
Right.
there's like such a special thing about Down syndrome
Mm.
that, as we just alluded to, give us joy because of his joy. And he
Yeah.
like brightens up every single thing. It's almost like the sermon. You are the light of the world. Like, you are the light of the world, Baker. Like, you have given
Yes.
so many people hope in your strength and your endurance and your ability to overcome. And just the smile, the $1,000,000 smile, just gives people hope. And that
Yes.
alone, I think, is just a testament of God's faithfulness. And just, it's like he's just painting a picture with Baker. Like, hey, look, just look here. And even, I mean, I'm going to take it even a step further. Like, God is going to use the low things, the humble things, the weak things, and elevate them.
Yeah.
Like, he's always going to take those things that we might see as weak or broken or whatever the case, and he's going to use that, and he's going to bring the proud and the humble down. And that's just how he works. Go read the scriptures. I mean, it's clear that's how he works, and that's how we should approach this moment. It's so good. And like, as you were kind of alluding to, like, when you go to Publix or Chick-fil-A and you see someone working that has Down syndrome, it's just like, gosh, like it just gives me so much
Mhm.
joy to see that like they're there and they're just loving
Yeah.
people that are coming in and out. And it's like they can do all these things. Like
Yes.
they're able, they're capable. And like you said,
Yes.
every person's different by all means. There might be some
Mhm.
that can't, but otherwise, like there's the potential and there's the ability to do that most of the time. And that's something that, in my mind, I want to finish up with at least is
Mhm.
just the inclusiveness and
Mhm.
diversity that we as Christians especially, but people in general, we need to pay attention to and
Mm.
make sure that we employ these people. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm wearing this shirt, so I wore it special for today. So
Yay.
Colorado, I can't remember. I'll put it in the show notes, but we went to Colorado. It's in Estes Park. There's a guy with Down syndrome.
Mm.
He's like 30 or 40 maybe, but he started his own business and it's blowing up and it's worldwide now at this
Mm.
point. He had to move offices, and me and mom went in there when we were in Colorado and we were like buying everything. So this is his actual handwriting.
Oh.
So it's in his drawing. So it's just like, and that's the thing he says, it's best day ever, best day
Yeah.
ever, best day ever, 24/7. And so give us something about the inclusivity of Down syndrome and how we should approach this.
Mm. Well, I think first of all, it's just brushing up. Just like talk to somebody. I'm not going to say Google because there's so much out there that's kind of disheartening about Down syndrome, even if you Google. But talk to somebody, talk to me about it, and don't be scared or shy away from it
Yeah,
because I love that. I love to talk about it. I'm
yeah,
learning things, so I want to teach other people these
yeah.
things.
It's
But
like we
know
need to
that
teach
just
the
like,
doctors too.
yeah, for sure. Just like God put a desire in our heart to do things, to have a purpose, and to work, He put that in people with intellectual disabilities too.
Come on,
And they want to have a purpose in life. They want to work. And a lot of times they're the best worker that all these businesses are going to have. They're going to be the hardest. They're going to show up, all these things. So
absolutely.
don't put a box around people with disabilities. If you don't do that, the sky's the limit for them. But when you start putting those boxes, even in schools, when you keep people with Down syndrome in a class with other people with special needs, put them in typical classrooms.
Yeah,
They can have an aid sometimes. They're just different ways if we don't put a box around them. That's what I would say.
that's good.
And just remember again that just because somebody has Down syndrome does not mean they're the same as this person has Down syndrome. They're all
Yeah,
there's different people with
right,
different wants and needs, and they care and they have feelings.
right.
Um, so there's a whole lot of things, but those are probably the most important to me is to speak with somebody, to learn all you can.
Mm.
If you have a kid, teach your kid about things instead of saying, "Hey, stop staring at," if
Yeah,
somebody walks in with Down syndrome, don't say, "Stop staring at them." Instead say, "Hey, yeah, tell them hello," or speak to
yeah,
them, because when you say stop staring at them, that makes you think like, that's still a sense of saying like, don't look at them. Like,
yeah,
no, look at them and speak, and maybe even ask them about, or I don't even know, some people may think differently, but even say, look, yeah, this is a person that's different than you and me, but you know what? He's a cool guy. Why don't you say, I don't know,
yeah.
just open the conversation instead of
He's still made
shunning
in
and
God's
telling your
image.
kid.
Like he's still made in
Right.
God's image, and ultimately like an image bearing
Mm-hmm.
person. And we must approach that. I love that. I think it's so
Mm-hmm.
important for us as, which I'm not a parent, but parents to
Mm-hmm.
educate, or as a single to educate myself to where
Yeah.
I know exactly what I'm dealing with
Mm-hmm.
or talking to, so that
Mm-hmm.
I can meet him where he needs to be met, and love him, and make sure that he is loved, and not the opposite, as you alluded to, of like, no, I'm going to turn away. Because if we just teach that, then one, you're teaching kids to respond in that way, or
Mm-hmm.
see that there's just some brokenness in them, that they can't be
Right.
someone, or a full-grown adult and do things. And the opposite is true. You're
Mm-hmm.
teaching this Down syndrome kid that he's broken and that he needs help and all
Mm-hmm.
these things, and that's just not true. It's just
Right.
not true at this point. And it's just, that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we need to educate ourselves on and learn about. And that's
Yeah.
part of the reason why I wanted to have this podcast, because I wanted to talk about it, but I also wanted people to hear your
Mm-hmm.
story, and hear the things that maybe have been communicated to the world, but also some of the things that haven't. And that, most importantly, like that, when you get a diagnosis like this, that like the Lord is going to be with you, that the Lord is going
Mm-hmm.
to be right there in the midst of your diagnosis. And it's so important to get a community. It's so important to have all these things that you
Mm-hmm.
discussed. And
Yeah.
that's it. I mean, that's literally the most important thing. And so let's wrap up with some words of
Mm-hmm.
encouragement. Like what, obviously you can do a, 1, 2, 3, or whatever the case may be in terms of, your whole story, maybe the last 2 years of like 2 or 3 of the biggest things that you want to tell people that are important, most important to you.
My phone may die, but hopefully I
You're
can get
fine.
this out. So
You're
as
good.
we're on the verge here. But I think that one thing I learned was to let go and surrender. Oh my
Mm,
gosh. Because when it's your own child, your flesh and blood, and you see them in the hospital, they're sick with a virus. They had to go to the hospital because of part of Down syndrome. It's part of their weak immune systems. Um, I was holding like this
mm,
to my baby, to Baker. I was holding on like I could do something. The anxiety was it was just like this. I was like this. And then I had multiple people, that nurse I told you about, that told me, like, let us fix this.
mm.
This isn't on you. I
That's good.
had somebody message me that doesn't even know me, but saw somebody share my story and said, my son went through something and I had to give it to God. And when I
Yeah.
did, God came down and performed a miracle in his life.
Mm,
And there were things, and that kept circulating in my mind from God. That was the word he was giving me. Let go. You
mm,
can't do anything. You can't give
yeah.
him to me. The story of Abraham taking his son up and giving it to God when God was like,
Mm,
I want to sacrifice Isaac, your son.
yeah.
And he let go and he gave that to God and God didn't do it, you saw. But that's how I kept hearing that message. So that was one of the strongest things to me. And I still, have to let go every day because I want
Yeah.
to be Baker's health is on me. It's on me. It's on me. I have to fix this. I have to do this. I have
Yeah.
to do the right thing or he's going to die or he's going to get sick. And I can't take that on. That's
Yeah.
where I have to let go and let God.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big thing. And I also want to um, just, tell others that it's not the end of the world. It's just the beginning of something beautiful. And
Mm,
there's a poem that talks about how you plan your trip to when you find out the diagnosis, it's like planning a trip to, I think, Paris, and you have all these beautiful things. You want to see the Eiffel Tower, you want to do this. Well, then you find out that you accidentally took a trip to Germany instead. It's like, but I wanted to go to Paris and see the Eiffel
yeah.
Tower. Well, but Germany has this. There's still beautiful flowers. There's still this, this, this.
Mm,
So your life may be directed in a different direction than
that's
you
good.
had planned, but it's still beautiful,
Mm,
just in a different way.
that's good.
So I think that that's what I would leave people. And please reach out to me. Don't try to go to doctors or different people or Google. Please reach out to somebody that has a
Yeah.
kid with Down syndrome.
Absolutely.
That's the
Absolutely.
best source that you're going to get. So
Good deal. Awesome. Well, Shelby, thank you so much for jumping on and talking and sharing, being vulnerable. Because,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much of this you've posted on social and shared, but I appreciate you sharing and being vulnerable because I do believe that people are listening and they're, whether they've walked through this season
Mm-hmm.
already or walking through it now or going to walk through it, I guarantee they're going to be able to glean something from your story and your testimony and your faith and the way you love the Lord and you just trusted him. And
Yeah.
so I thank you so much for hopping on.
Well,
Like I
thank
said, I'm
you.
going to throw all of her information in the description of
Mm.
all these, wherever you're watching or listening to. And so thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me be part of this. I can't wait to just hear from more people that watch and follow you along. I'm so proud of you and just how you've always listened to the Lord and
Mm.
done what He's wanted. And so I can't wait to see where God takes you and your family. And congratulations on your marriage. And I feel like there's
Thank you.
been so
One
much.
year yesterday.
Oh my gosh, that's wild.
We
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, well, Shelby, you have a great night and we'll talk soon.
All right. We hit an hour on the dot, 8:08. We started at 7:08. That was nice.
Perfect. All
Thank you,
right.
Zach. I appreciate it
Absolutely.
so much.
You're
All right.
welcome. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode featuring Shelby Myers and talking about embracing joy, parenthood, faith, and Down syndrome. I absolutely love this conversation, and I hope you did too. So if you did, please subscribe if you're on YouTube or Spotify. Like us, all the things. Comment, share it with a friend, share it with somebody that you know that may have a similar story or similar experience, or something that they might be going through that is very similar to Shelby's story. As we said, I was going to sling in her Instagram handle in the show notes, and you will see it there. But I also wanted to tell you it is at Shelby Ann Myers. Shelby spelled like it normally is, like the Mustang. I'm not a car person. And Ann Myers, Myers. That's where you can find her and get a wealth of knowledge. She's going to share it. Literally, as I was talking, she was sharing stuff in the podcast. She had already shared some really cool stuff about organic foods. And so she shares a wealth of knowledge. So follow her. Also follow the Instagram page. We do now have an Instagram page, and that is called Livin the Sermon, LIN or LIVIN, no G, the Sermon. That's it. That's all it is. Follow us there. That's where you'll see clips of every episode and maybe some extra teachings. I posted one today about grace. And so you should tune into it, look into it, and share it. Share it with some friends if it connects with you. And so, yeah, the next episode will be shot on Monday. This episode will come out on Monday. So if you hear it, I'll be recording an episode that day. And ultimately, I'm excited for this conversation, and I think it might have something to do with race. So, without further ado, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and we'll be back soon.